Welcome back to the Crescendo Go-to-Market podcast. Today we have Owen, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at InfiniGods. Do you want to give us a quick introduction to yourself and InfiniGods as well?
For sure. Great to have me on, Sash. Really appreciate it. I'm Owen O'Donoghue. Spent the last decades at Facebook as part of the gaming team, working with big gaming companies. And about 18 months ago, co-founded a blockchain gaming studio called InfiniGods. And really what we're trying to do is build fun games that have mass appeal, particularly on mobile, that also use some of the best parts of blockchain technology to make the games more fun and more enjoyable for players.
And I think that's what's really interesting about InfiniGods is there's a lot of unique mechanisms that I haven't seen anywhere else in the Web3 gaming space. So I'm curious about your story because I know before you got into the Web3 gaming space, you were working at Facebook, right? You were leading there. Essentially, I believe you were leading gaming at Facebook, right?
Yeah, I was leading the user acquisition or the advertising side in North America and actually in Latin America as well, but it was very small. And really, I joined very early on in Facebook in 2010 in the European office. And Facebook was trying to figure out its commercial strategy at the time. So are we selling advertising? Are we selling subscriptions, gifting? There was a ton of ideas. We started to see we had a platform opened where people could build applications within Facebook using Flash. And games like Farmville, Texas Hold'em Poker, Slotomania, Candy Crush, all these games are actually operating on web and producing pretty good revenue in terms of payments. But just the amount of how much time people were spending on those games compared to the rest of Facebook for certain players was pretty incredible to see. And so it was a real driver of Facebook's early business. And so I was part of the team that was tasked with, okay, let's grow this business. Let's go and recruit other developers and let's actually help them grow their game through both organic and paid means, and then help them monetize as well. And so that was a rocket ship, and actually is still a rocket ship of a business. So really went from zero to quite big, quite fast. During that time, really saw that again, I actually had a background where I actually worked at Microsoft, worked in Xbox. So I had some very brief experience with gaming, but it was really crazy to see how where I traditionally thought games were, like big fancy launch. It's a really cool game. A lot of people play it, and what I was seeing at Facebook was it was almost like it was essentially almost financial. It was these free to play games, get them out there to an audience, make it free, but allow in-game payments. And then really see what's the value of players and then continue to acquire them through digital advertising as long as it was profitable. And so you would see these businesses really go from zero to making like 10, 20, 30, $40,000 run rates. And then actually, as we got into mobile, those games started to be able to make 100,000 to almost $1 million a day in revenue. And it was the birth in the West of free-to-play gaming coming at scale. And so, that transition was, or just seeing that was actually very interesting. It was a real hotbed for startups where you didn't need to be this big publisher like EA or Activision, who had been around for 20 years, had all these established relationships with distributors and consoles. And that business just grew and grew. And Facebook's role became more and more about acquiring players, both on the paid means, and became quite sophisticated from being able to just get somebody to install your game to, hey, I want somebody who has a payment pattern of this, who has a purchase behavior of this, therefore they're more likely to be a high value player in my game. And so spent 10 years on that. That business went from literally, it was probably about $5-6 million a year for Facebook. And when I was leaving, it was close to a $5 billion revenue line for Facebook and now Meta. And it continues to be probably one of the big drivers. But very interesting just to see that side of gaming, because I always assumed it was console, it was PC, because that's what I played. But actually, what I saw over the last decade was the vast majority of gamers actually they switched to mobile, and they were not like me. They were, they're female, they're older, and so very very interesting experience while I was working there.
What did a typical like day to day look like in what you did? Because you were essentially working with these gaming companies. I guess your job was to help them acquire users and get a ROI so they would spend more on getting users, right? It sounded like kind of that sort of enablement role on your end, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, and it obviously changed a lot. There was a lot of just going in and finding and doing a lot of business development to find folks, and first few years typically would have been going into markets in Eastern Europe and Israel, developers who are actually making for other platforms at the time, like this is even pre-mobile, and who make Flash games, persuading them to move over. But typically your day to day would be looking at, okay, what are you trying to do? What's your target? And so it's, what type of game do you have? What's the typical pattern that represents a good player? So is that lifetime value? So how much they purchase over their life, or there are other behaviors. And it's then working with the developer to parse those little audiences out and actually help them, what creatives will go and speak to that audience, how to target them. So beyond just age and geo, are there interests, are there behaviors? And that obviously changed a lot, where at the start you were saying, hey, use static interests. So what people have said they like on Facebook, this is like, feels like so long ago, all through to today, where you'll actually go and say, hey, like, take an audience in a market, really focus on they have exhibited these types of behaviors via SDKs, and go after and bid this amount for them, use these amount of creatives. So it's very hands-on. And then really it's measuring, is it so, and essentially what I kind of said earlier, it's like finance, it's like your ad campaign should be returning positively. So it's kind of like people who are trading tokens or trading NFTs. It's like, what's your portfolio on this campaign? Is it actually getting 100% return on investment? So the players are coming in and spending as much as you've spent on them or more. Keep spending, keep doubling down on that. And then some of the other campaigns that are not working, can you change things? Should you just stop, etc.? And so my job was doing that, and then managing the teams that would do that. And often as time went on, it was less. It was very much about then building in various technologies from Facebook, now Meta, so various SDKs, APIs, various different ways to break out users. So pretty deep on the user acquisition front, and lots of products that came out that revolutionized and really helped that.
That's interesting. And it seems like on Facebook gaming, especially because you're working with these larger spenders and was such a core part of the business, it seems like there was a lot of support given to them. Because I remember when I was running my ad agency, Facebook definitely, we were more on the e-commerce and courses side of things, but we definitely saw like we were like not getting much attention from Facebook, even if we were spending like pretty large budgets, while Google would give us like all kinds of beta features, and they treated us pretty well. But it sounds like all the support was going to gaming, so maybe that's what I should be doing.
It was funny. It was funny because they actually dedicated. So I was in the European sales team. There was like 10 of us. There was hardly anybody, and so Reba was covering the English speaking country in Europe, Asia, and everywhere, Africa. And so it's funny when we started to really mature and went from a small organization to a huge. I mean, Facebook's a giant now. Meta's a giant in terms of employees. We broke out gaming as a totally separate vertical globally. So we had like a EMEA team, a North America team, etc. And e-commerce and autos and everything was stuck in there. But gaming was always kept on its own piece because, again, the learnings for how every game scales, it became pretty uniform. So if it was a mobile game from a Chinese developer or an American developer or somebody in the UK, the playbook was roughly the same. And so there was a big economy of scale for Facebook to actually do that. And so that meant you get to work with, really get to work with all these games that if I look at the top 10 on iOS, the majority our team would have touched at one stage. So yeah, pretty crazy. But I feel you on that, because even today we're spending money today on user acquisition. And even now, Facebook's kind of Meta's changed a bit, where it's very top heavy. They focus on only really big advertisers. Well, Google gives you a ton of support no matter who you are. So just different ways of operating businesses.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I think it depends on the vertical as well, because it's kind of depends on spend, vertical, etc. But yeah, moving on. How did you decide to essentially? What was the point that you decide? Okay, I want to check out Web3 gaming. I want to build my own studio. And how did you and your co-founder Damon meet?
For me personally, I was in 2017, and I was actually in Facebook, and so I was running a team that focused very much on new business. One of the teams I had was very much new business, new developers, and so we focused on all types of gaming. And so CryptoKitties actually came up as an advertiser. They wanted to advertise on Facebook, and so we allowed them, and we would just start to say, hey, typical things. What does a good value of a player look like to you? What's your retention? We have a lot of benchmarks that we see, anonymous ones we can share, and the numbers they were giving were like insane. So retention was like 2x what we typically would see in free to play, and then we're like, okay, this is crazy. And then people will be trading some of the cats in game as well. And we'd see these other ridiculous fees and revenues coming in. And so it was one of the first times in a long time that there was a real evolution on the free-to-play gaming model. And that's really important, because free-to-play is pretty much 60-70% of gaming in the world today. It's just everything, if not even bigger. And so that was kind of interesting and crazy. And then invested like everybody did at the time. I had a big Polynex account and buying everything. And then it kind of went away. Bear market happened kind of 2018. 2019 was pretty bad. And then, post, I suppose late 2020, we started to see some real pickup. And obviously Axie then started. And again, Axie's, the revenues they're bringing in on a monthly basis, or just the total amount of revenue around the game for a few months was, we were talking, I think it was the high hundreds of millions, if not billions at one stage, out of only 3 or 4 million players. And so again, that was like a data point saying that again is really unheard of. Like we've had console gaming, we know how that works, we know mobile, even real money gaming. I one of the teams there. I understood like what that would look like. But this is like totally different. What's going on here? This is a new behavior. And so it kind of brings me to Damon. So Damon was one of my first customers at Facebook. So he had a great role at a big gaming company, left it to do his own game, started on Facebook. I called him up. I saw the numbers. They were small, but like really promising. He was building a great game, scaled it like crazy, sold it within a year to a big company. They acquired it, kept him on because they wanted to operate it. And he built that business. I think he had like over like $250 million in revenue, over 25 million downloads, super successful. And so I was always in touch with him, and we're always trying to figure out something to do. And so I was seeing this going on and said, Damon, and said, look, I think this is the next wave. I think we need to jump in. And we started to look at a lot of different things that were going on in this space, like Axie, Star Atlas, Alluvium. We had a lot of concerns of what people were doing, because we were like, just how are they going to sustain this growth in terms of players, or can they even realize making these games that they're talking about? And some of the tokenomics looked kind of crazy, but we were like, it's clear that if there's real ownership and the blockchain validates that you own certain assets in game, that's got tremendous value, has potential to have tremendous value to real gamers. That they can not only like trade things, but they can keep their experience from game to game. They can be rewarded for that. We'd seen a lot of different problems come up in mobile gaming. The classic one was that you go into a free-to-play game and everything you're buying, it's essentially consumable. The developer can just get rid of it whenever. And so you can invest a lot into a game, a lot of time, and a lot of money. And then, developer stops updating it, or you want to move on to something else. And that whole investment is gone. It's something when it's like a $20, $30 game, console game or a PC game. It's like, okay, cool. But we saw people investing thousands of dollars into some of these mobile games. And if the developer decides to stop, that's it. And there was some pretty big examples that were just very frustrating from a consumer side and the mobile side. People building some big city building games that people spent a lot on, and the developers said are not supporting it anymore. And it's like, wow, like these people have spent years building and spending money, and now it's gone. And so the idea that certain things, that experiences could be transferable on chain was very interesting to us. And then the second piece was everybody's focusing on some interesting DeFi stuff in gaming, and we were like, the real problem we felt in free to play gaming, not the problem, but the opportunity was that this really low economic participation rate, and by that I mean people who spend money in games. Your typical mobile game, if you look at something like Clash of Clans or Homescapes or Gardenscapes, maybe 1 to 2% of the total player base has actually spent money in that. Very much the economies favor your pure demand side. They very much say, okay, you just keep grinding away, and if you want to fast forward time, you just spend some money here. And so that was almost a set way of operating for 10 years. I'm like, okay, well, if you start to look at opening the economy a bit more, and you start to say, if I allow certain parts of the economy that players can trade amongst themselves, and we kind of seen bits of this in gray markets, like in World of Warcraft, people would trade things. For example, CSGO, they trade skins. It's like, if you now start to say, hey, parts of your game economy, players can trade them, and then you say those trades are validated by a source of truth, which happens to be a blockchain, then our theory was you can get a lot more players involved in economic participation, not just people who want to pay, but other people who may want to participate in being sellers in the economy. And so we thought that was a very interesting dynamic to potentially bring into a games economy. And could that increase the payer rate, as we would call it? That's very much with the developer lens on. Could that actually introduce new behaviors? It could introduce new friction in the game, and friction is generally good for games. So there was a lot of different. Essentially, it was a lot of different things that the technology presented that we were like, hey, the data seems like, even with the crappy executions that we're seeing, that like people are engaging in this. And if we can build a great game and integrate some of those ownership elements, some of those trading elements within just a fun game, then I think we'll have something successful. And so that's obviously what we've been endeavoring to do.
That's really interesting what you said about participation rate, right? Like participation rate being kind of very, very low. And then by introducing some of these blockchain elements, you're almost giving a lot of these players, right? Let's say in InfiniMerge, which is one of your games, you essentially get these followers and you can mint them onto the blockchain. So you're essentially getting new ways of people being able to turn these, basically in-game items they're earning into NFTs that they can then trade among themselves, and creating a secondary economy for that. Are you worried at all about, let's say, on your side, right? Like you're selling in-game items. Are you worried about those secondary sales taking away from primary sales? And have you done thinking on how do you approach that potential risk?
Yeah, that is and it's a great way of putting it, like the secondary economy, because you want to facilitate that. So InfiniMerge was a great example of, we went fully that everything is on chain in terms of power-ups for the game. One is a scarce set of NFTs, which, by the way, is like another awesome reason why you build a blockchain. You can really make things scarce in game, and we could have a whole hour conversation on how interesting that is. And then we said another items are power-ups that can be traded amongst players. And so the whole economy essentially was secondary. What we came to, what we think the right balance is that it's not the whole economy can be traded by players, but only certain parts. And then you can gradually open it up. And so in our latest game, King of Destiny, we have about 5 big things, consumables that people need to be successful at that game. And one of those is what we call an off-chain to on-chain pair. And so there's 4 other areas that people can purchase direct from the developer, or just continue to play and earn those in-game rewards and achievements as they progress through the game with tournaments, that kind of stuff. But there is that one element that we won't sell, we don't touch, we don't sell direct. There's ways to source them in game, and some players will source more than others, and then we obviously have a platform that they can go and actually trade them to each other. They can all be bundled up as ERC 721s and transferred to other players. And so I think that's the interesting thing. I think the utopia of a fully open game economy right now is very, very hard. You haven't seen anybody really successfully do it. The other thing is the influence of where there's a lot of speculative trading, which 99% of GameFi is speculation right now in terms of the asset prices and so on. That can really upset your game economy. And so I think having some level of control at the developer level, I think is actually pretty crucial to make sure the game is balanced. But you still keep some of those incentives in place for players to trade. And so even what we've taken with King of Destiny, it's a feature on the game. There's one feature, a tournament feature, where the Web3 elements come in. But there's a lot of other parts of the game that would be very typical Web2. And so I suppose, where it comes from is looking over the last few years of what's been successful and gotten traction with gamers, and there's not too much to lean on the Web3 side, and so there's an element of kind of dipping our toe in the water with opening that up. But if that's successful and looks like it's good for gamers, then you can start to open up other parts of your game's economy to them as well.
And to just give people an overview, what are the 3 games in the InfiniGods ecosystem right now?
We've a InfiniMerge, which is a web-based merge game, very addictive. Play a lot, kind of like Candy Crush, but you're merging items. Very competitive game. That's on web right now. We're planning on doing a mobile version at some stage in 2024, which we think will be a lot of fun. Our second game is Immortal Siege. That's very much in beta right now. It's on web. It's a tower defense game. We actually have trading card mechanics in there as well, which we think was pretty interesting. We have a hardcore group of people testing it, which is cool. The idea with that game is we want to go mobile, but we think we can also go Epic and Steam at some stage in the future as well. We'll probably actually likely go Epic and Steam first before mobile. And then our main title really is our mobile first title, which is King of Destiny. And so King of Destiny is, in terms of genre, it's called Luck Battle, which is probably very new for a lot of people. But there was a game about 6 years ago launched called Coin Master, and essentially you play a slot machine for coins, use those coins to build a village. You can then attack other friends and steal their coins from their village, and vice versa. And incredibly, it's a top 10 iOS game. And there's been a bunch of other similar games come out recently, namely Monopoly Go, which you can't really leave the internet without seeing Monopoly Go advertised. And it's the highest grossing game today. It's going to be the highest grossing game, particularly on mobile in 2023 and possibly across all platforms. And so our game has some similar mechanics, but people can actually own some of their pieces in the game. People can actually trade some of the in-game currencies. And we have a few other things in there that we think are uniquely different beyond just Web3 to make it a better product.
And one of the most interesting things that I think I've heard you guys talk about is how, with mobile gaming right now, you're having essentially competition's very high. Attribution is more difficult than ever with IDFA, and cookies are also going away. So overall, it's kind of getting to be a pretty competitive niche. Now, one of the interesting things I would love your take on is how does LTV play into what blockchain enables, right? Because I think one of the big theses behind blockchain gaming is that it can increase LTV with these new kind of mechanics. So would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We even have an LTV calculation going across Web 2 and Web 3 for King of Destiny. And so there's kind of two ways that it really helps. One, we believe it's going to increase the number of people economically participating in the game. So essentially, from our point of view, it's more payers in the game. And so take that number from, say, 2% to, we think, 3, 4, 5, 6% is actually pretty possible with these mechanics. We saw something similar with InfiniMerge, our first game, which is web only, which is typically much lower monetization rates, but we were hitting like 10% monetization rate, which was crazy high. And so we think just to be more people monetizing, so that's good. The second is then your calculation is pretty much how much IAP are they purchasing? How many ads are they watching in game? Because we have some in-app advertising as well. That's a revenue contributor. And then you also look at certain items are actually NFTs in the game. They're non-fungible. So there's obviously primary sales. If they're resold, there's a royalty secondary on that as well. And then there's obviously that currency that players can trade amongst themselves. And every time, if you are going to sell that, you pay a small selling fee. And so we add those in there. So we think we can not just increase the breadth of payers, but also increase the rate of monetization that players have, because there's essentially more things for them to do and participate in. Now, this is very much coming out of developer lens. I think it's very much looking at how do you actually if you want to be very competitive in free to play and mobile gaming, it is about, can you get that higher LTV than the competitor? Because if you get the higher LTV, then you can actually reinvest that into a better game, into more users via user acquisition, etc. To hire better developers, etc., or more developers, and you can just get bigger and better overall. And so the one of our thesis from our first couple of games going into mobile is that we think we can be very competitive on the LTV front with the top games on the App Store. And it's really like, if you can get to some sort of feature parity with them on the Web 2 side, and then introduce our off-chain to on-chain trading, then we believe that gives us that extra 1 or 2% in an LTV side. If you get that, then you can outbid them on the ad auctions, and you can actually win market share against them. And so that's the fascinating side of, that's how we view it. I think we're not looking, okay, can we compete with Parallel or some of the Web3 space? It's very much focused on where we see the majority of the consumer time and the consumer spend, which is on mobile, and how do we get a competitive edge in there?
Yeah, that is fascinating, and I think that's probably the biggest benefit blockchain can have to existing game developers, is that it adds new ways of essentially optimizing the games for higher LTV, higher monetization rates. What you said about monetization rates is huge too, because if you can double that, you're pretty much doubling your revenue per user, right? And your ads now can work much better. You can scale them a lot more. So this is very interesting. And I know so far you've mainly focused on the community building side, right? So the community is very active. I see a lot of the Wolfstyle members in there, where it definitely is a good vibe in there, and the games are really fun. But now it seems like with Kings of Destiny, I believe you've rolled it out on at least a few countries on the App Store. Are you starting to add in much more of a focus on paid UA and paid acquisition, and what does that stack look like in terms of user acquisition right now?
Yeah, it's good. It's still, I'd say, firstly, it's still early. So we've launched. We're still adding some pretty major features coming in over the next 2 months to go in, and so probably around February you'll start to see some pretty serious user acquisition. We have been spending primarily using Meta and Google, and so we've just been testing different things. Trying to get a read on day one retention. That's some small numbers. For certain markets, is looking actually around that 40% mark. Pretty good starting place. But we're launched, I think, 3 weeks, so we're still trying to optimize that. We're still getting a lot of feedback on things like various little bugs. Things are responding little things that are not working. Some things are working well that we didn't think so. What we're really intending to do is we're broadening out the testing over the next few weeks. So looking at Apple search ads, just to really see what's our CPI there, is there any quality bar that we can look at, and then particularly into the ad networks like AppLovin, like Unity as well, and even some of the ad formats we're beginning to bring out, like playables. So this is very deep down the rabbit hole of like gaming ads, but this is typically actually what drives most gamers into games. So getting into the playable space, we started working with the partner to develop some playables, so that allows us to access ad inventory there. And so we're really like, right now, if I look at like the main metric where we have a certain level within the game that players unlock a feature and our tournament feature. And so we're really tracking like our players, how what's the funnel looking like to get there? Can that be optimized? Are there channel differences? We've seen geo differences already, but we're not surprised by that as well. So like how our Canadian players have operated versus Philippine players are actually dramatically different. We've actually seen purchasers come in, which we're not optimized for at all. And that's been very interesting. People coming in and playing one level and then just buying some of the intro packs straight away. We're seeing some really hardcore people stick around from Web 2. So they'll connect Facebook and they will be attacking and going through the levels all day long, and people doing 20, 25-minute session times some days. We also get a lot of people who are like just coming, playing a level and churning out. And so like we need to do that. So we're like just over 5,000 players in a few weeks. We have the controls to increase that up and down without too much craziness. The costs are actually pretty decent, which is great. We're kind of surprised probably one thing, I know we talked before, I was worried about some of the CPI costs. And so we haven't got to serious scale. But even when we did push a few campaigns, we were like, oh, like it's actually well within what we thought it would be. And in some cases, actually even cheaper. And so, the only thing that's been probably like where on the user acquisition and the growth side has been obviously Apple and iOS 14. And so this is just a fact of life these days. So the targeting is actually really good. When we target on Facebook or Google, or on Google UAC, Google advertising, we actually do see good iOS quality players come through. But there's that data lag of 72 hours. Do you know how good a campaign really is or not? Versus any Android campaign, we're able to like, okay, this campaign is crap, just shut it off. This one's great, double the budget, more creatives, let's go. We've had a few of those already, which has been exciting. So the only real change is that delay, be able to make decisions on any campaign coming from Apple. But there's other optimizations we're doing there to try and to get that data within 24 hours so we can make some decisions. So that's going really deep down the ad rabbit hole. But maybe it's something to kind of to comment on. We looked at the alternative if we weren't on mobile and how do we drive players at scale, particularly in the Web3 side. And there really is nothing. Your most successful games maybe get 5 figures for a very brief period of time. And they really struggle to hold on to it. And the types of players and the motivations don't necessarily lend themselves to a great gaming business. And, personally, I'd never seen in my 10 years and still haven't any browser-based game unless it was connected to a big platform scale in any sort of meaningful way. And so, one of the benefits of choosing mobile is very predictable ways to acquire players. So everybody talks about mass adoption in Web3 and we need to get there. And it's like the platform is like your starting point. So if you're on web only, very hard to get scale. Very, very hard. Ironically, very hard to get scale without losing your shirt in terms of spend. Where mobile and even some of the stores like Epic and Steam, it's a lot more controllable of how you can acquire and retain players.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that 100%. There isn't really that large of a Web3 gaming user base. The games I've seen that have gained momentum are actually appealing to the Web2 crowd. So one of our portfolio companies, the Bornless, they have, I think at this point, 180K Steam wish lists. And they've just been focusing on really like guerrilla style marketing, reaching out to, kind of like news outlets, getting their influencers on board, and really not focusing on the Web3 side at all. If a Web3 desktop game wants to, or like a browser game wants to really go and acquire users, kind of have to focus on the Web2 side, unless they're more of like a GameFi experience, right? If you're focused on GameFi, which is like, that's a great product, right? Like people enjoy it, right? There's definitely product market fit there. But if you're trying to build a game that scales to millions of users, I do think that either you're going to have to onboard Web2 gamers, or you're going to have to really figure out like an acquisition funnel that ultimately is going to be mobile based, or if it's on PC, then Steam or Epic based, right? You can't really do it without that.
it's exactly, and it's like I always struggled when we were first getting to the space of there were certain projects getting a lot of attention and hype, and you kind of understand why now. But in the back of my head, I was like, how the hell will they acquire players to even? They're just going to use all these tokens. You know, what's their CPI going to be like? And it's very boring, but it's a very boring topic, I think, for things like crypto, Twitter. But it's kind of like the majority of gaming is like it's kind of what's your LTV versus your cost of acquiring them. And that cost can be free, it can be paid, but it's still a cost you need to go in. And it doesn't matter if you're launching a game on PlayStation, you're working that out, or Android. It's the same equation you ultimately need to get going. And so I think it's going back to, it's one of those things that we thought we'd differentiate ourselves on the Web3 side, was that more of a conservative approach, but you could clearly see here's how you can get millions of players. And similar to some of the other companies you mentioned as well, like Bornless, like you're on Steam and you do some of the right marketing, you can get some players and it can grow quite nicely on Steam if you've got a great game. Epic seems to have a lot of opportunity similar to that as well.
Yeah, it almost seems like there's two playbooks. There's one which is like, sorry, okay. It almost seems like there's two playbooks. So there's one which is PC based, which is much more organic, hype game trailer, lots of news outlets, and there's basically a ton of hype, right? And a huge marketing budgets, and harder to attribute and measure back. And then there's other, which is mobile gaming, which is very data driven. It's very much performance marketing. What's your LTV? What's your CAC? What's your conversion rates throughout the funnel? And it's more math than anything else in terms of the optimization process. And it's like these are two different worlds. And so you kind of have to understand which world you're in. And sometimes when you see these studios that are kind of like trying to be in the middle of both, it's a little bit disconcerting. But it's I think in your guys' case, it's like I can see very clearly that mobile first seems to be like a very big focus. And that's also where I'm personally very bullish on InfiniGods as a team and as a studio, is because I see kind of the approach of like really trying to optimize and having a mathematical approach towards things.
Yeah, very not the sexiest, but it's very efficient at growing. And I think it's very interesting. Like I think in the Web3, some of the Web3 projects, some of the games are very much going for that real big hype. And it's like, I think you're like, I hope you get there. I really hope you're successful. Wow, that is so hard. It's so hard, and I think your competitors, because you're trying to win market share in a very limited space. So if you think about PC gamers or web, the tiny browser market or the console market, you've got a very small number of publishers out there, EA, Blizzard, etc., and they will come with hundreds of millions and huge marketing teams, and they've done this 20 times. And they will go and say, okay, like the big 4 or 5 games on PlayStation and Xbox this year, this is what they are. And if you're trying to sneak in there or sneak in on the PC side, you really need to have an amazing game and still get picked up. But the hit rate's so much lower. And when I learned at Facebook was the math element ultimately won in the end. You even saw these. Like King and Candy Crush was a great example. It was like nobody gave them a chance. They were a skill-based game for years, a web-based game. They decided to do games on Facebook, and they decided to go mobile, and they just got their calculations right. Simple game, and they got their LTV versus CPI, understood their markets, their audiences. And then you've got the Activisions who couldn't do that, saying, okay, now I'll buy you. And so it's very interesting. And I suppose it's good to see more Web3 companies. I wish there was more out there, or we talked about them. Because I think you still see all the major projects that have NFTs, and you see a lot of FUD online, like people saying, "Oh, there's a thread today on X, aka Twitter, blockchain gaming's dead." I'm like, "Well, have you heard of NFL Rivals? Look what Mythical are doing. Complete 180 on their strategy of being all hype into, okay, we'll buy the rights to NFL, but we'll use performance marketing and we'll do good viral mechanics and we'll build a great executional blockchain." And very successful game. They're not talked about there. Upland has been a Web3 success story since 2020, as far as I'm concerned. On mobile, on web, So I think that's the distortion you see is the hype takes up a lot of the oxygen in the space, but you have these other math-based companies doing pretty well and building great businesses.
What do you feel like is one piece of infrastructure that is currently missing in the Web3 gaming space, and that if you could like will into existence, or just tell like the founders out there, hey, go build this thing, go raise a round, and go build this out. Pain point.
I was gonna say I was gonna be I was gonna say almost it's not really infrastructure, but regulation is needed. It's a tough one, but just with some of the token things I see, I'm like, there probably needs to be some oversight or something there. Let everybody know who's really, who's market making these tokens, etc., and when they're dropping off. But no, the more obvious one I would say is the less controversial, sexy one I think is ad network for Web3. And so, because what's interesting, we have, currently we have like 700,000 wallets playing Web3 games every day, and so that's maybe 200,000, 300,000 real people. So the GameFi audience is actually quite small. But the audience who actually hold Bitcoin or Ethereum, or who have touched something, who hold a digital asset, a crypto asset, is actually way larger. So I think, I've seen interesting estimates that there's close to 50 million people have cryptocurrency in some form in the US. I think that might be high, but even if it's 20 or 30 million, that's pretty high. But there's a lot more out there when it comes to some of the bigger pieces. And so I think, some way to connect those folks, what else do they do outside of just cryptocurrency? What are their interests? And some sort of a targeted ad network will be pretty big, because if you think about, while we're targeting gamers, it helps us when they're a gamer and they actually understand Web3, or they have some understanding, because we don't have to take them through a huge learning path to understand how to trade, or what they're buying actually happens to be a non-fungible token. Therefore, you may want to put it into a secure wallet at some stage. So actually, that's a lot of our community, is those types of folks. They're really big gamers, but they understand the technology. And so I think getting more of a Web3 ad network is something that's missing. It's very hard to do without owning a lot of content. And so I really think there's a company I love, and that not that many people may have heard of, is AppLovin. And they really, they went into the ad network space in gaming, where it was basically Facebook and Google split up the whole thing. And they said, I'm going to go to other games and I'm going to try and get inventory from them, and I'm going to repackage and sell that inventory to other gaming companies. And they created this amazing flywheel business. I think that's a huge opportunity in the Web3 space right now. Somebody to buy some of that traffic where we know Web3 consumers are, and start to repackage it with better targeting for other Web3 companies to use.
So there is a couple of different ad network startups that I've talked to, Slice, HypeLab, but I don't think any of them are really focused on the gaming side. So that's a good idea for sure, if you guys are listening. And okay, that makes a ton of sense. And with AppLovin, did they start out buying inventory, or did they start out as a DSP? Because I know they have kind of like this overall, they have a lot of inventory, but they also act as a DSP on top of other inventory.
Yeah, they started off as a DSP. Yeah, they had no games at the time, so they had analytics product, and so say, hey, we'll give you free analytics, but give us a look at some of your inventory, so we know you've got an ad stack. And so they, a story. What they would be very clever is they pick a subgenre, and so they one that I ran it into. There's a subgenre called social casino, which is like it's free to play slots that you can't win any money, but people spend $7 billion a year in social casino games, but they can never win. But they picked that category and they targeted tier 2 developers. So they weren't really like the biggest developers. They weren't monetizing as well. They said, hey, I want to show ads to your best users. I'll give you $80, $90 CPMs. And they're like, sure. And then they're able to take those players and then sell that inventory to to the top tier social casino players. And they'll pay a lot more than that to actually reach and acquire those players. And so They started actually that way, just kind of knocking off genre by genre. And then obviously at their own analytics product, they were building up, okay, understanding who these customers were. They were understanding a bit more that. And so they were able to then start to become, become a better DSP. And then they acquired Machine Zone and a few other companies. So then they're able to supply their own impressions as well. But yeah, they started there and just worked their way up where, and I say going back to the ad network space, no matter what technology it is, it's really who owns the underlying content. And so, for them to go in where, again, really Facebook and Google own most of the internet. And not only their sites, but obviously they had their pixels, their SDKs pretty much everywhere. To go in and to like squeeze in and do that was super impressive. And I think in the Web3 space, there's no major dominant content players in there yet, apart from Twitter, you could argue, but they've got no real interest. But there is probably ways to understand and break up those users and to understand where they're at and to create that flywheel.
It's fascinating how Adtech it's just starting to take off in Web3, and it's very basic at this point because there's not that many users, there's not that much data. The publishers are still like kind of cagey about letting people essentially run ads on their inventory, right? So it's still kind of in the early stages, but I do agree there's a huge opportunity there where it's kind of all this new inventory that Google and Facebook, they're not really taking part in this ecosystem yet. So there's like this window of opportunity to just come in and take up all the inventory and just, build something interesting. And then, that's all I'll say on that subject for now, just to, but yeah, I guess to wrap up the conversation, and this has been an incredibly enlightening conversation. I think definitely your experience with kind of user acquisition and gaming growth, it's pretty mind-blowing. And to just wrap up, where would people go to learn more about InfiniGods, get involved? Where should they go?
Yeah, wherever they're comfortable. I mean, we're on website is infinigods.com. We're on Twitter as well, InfiniGods there, and obviously we've a Discord. Discord's probably the best if you like using that platform. A lot of our team are in there. As you said, a lot of the Wolf Game crew and some of the Wolves DAO crew and Pixel Vault. We have a lot of folks from those communities in and around, and they're just honestly awesome. I mean, they're highly intelligent, understand what they're doing, really nice community members. So they're great if people just want to ask around there. Plus, we have our own community folks as well. I would say if you're in the US, Canada, Australia, or the Philippines, download King of Destiny and check out that game. I think what we want to be known for, I was thinking with this the other day, less and less do we want to be known for. It's InfiniGods. It's like, okay, what's that game that we're playing? I think it's getting out of this hype, this pre-launch hype phase into like just be known for the game, how fun it is. So if people want to, they can go and check out and play King of Destiny.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for jumping on.
Cool. Thanks, Ash. Great to be on.